Hi, it's Dave Morris with News OK, and I'm here today with Ben Walnick. Thanks for joining us, Ben. We're here to talk about the severe weather season. And Ben, we had an early start to the season this year with devastating tornadoes in February, and the normal severe weather season is just around the corner. So, all right, can you explain exactly how thunderstorms form?
Yeah, thanks, Dave. There's three ways that ingredients that are needed for thunderstorms really to develop. The first is you need moisture, especially down near the surface. And at least for Oklahoma, you get that moisture coming in from the Gulf of Mexico when we get those south and southeast winds bringing in the very, very moist air, and you need that to start off. The second thing you need is you need the air to be very unstable. And in order to have the air unstable at near the surface, you need it to be warm and moist, and aloft, you need it to be cold and dry, so that when you have a bubble of air, if you picture water boiling on a stove, and those bubbles start at the bottom of the pot and they raise to the top. That's kind of what happens in the atmosphere with the parcels of air. They rise, and in order for them to rise quickly, the air needs to be unstable. And the last thing you need is you need a source for the lift so those parcels start moving up in the atmosphere. And those will be anything from cold fronts, warm fronts. If one part of the state is very, very warm and the other part of the state is a little bit cooler under clouds, that difference in heating could cause that. Also, the difference between moist air and dry air with that dry line, and that's where we see a lot of our severe storms.
Ben, you mentioned the three ingredients, but it seems like we have those conditions all the time in Oklahoma.
Yeah, in Oklahoma, we see a lot of those dry line initiation storms, and that happens because out in the west panhandle of Texas, the elevation there is much higher, and so you'll have a very, very thin layer of moist air because the ground is literally closer to the sky. While down here in Oklahoma, it'll be a much thicker layer of moisture, and that's where you'll see the development of that dry line, and we'll see the storms initiate off that boundary. So being in the Great Plains and also being close to the Gulf of Mexico for that moisture source, that's really the main reason we see a lot of severe weather in the spring here in Oklahoma.
Now, those of us who lived in Oklahoma all of our lives, we realize usually the severe weather happens in the afternoon, late afternoon. Why is that?
Well, what happens is at night when there's no solar radiation, and so at night the temperatures will cool and the ground will cool, and so the temperature right near the surface cools the most. It gets pretty cold, and the cooler air is very, very stable. So the stable layer near the surface, it takes the daytime heating during the afternoon to deteriorate that stable layer. So by the time you get to the afternoon, that's when the air is the most unstable, and that's when you'll see those storms fire up.
Well, let's talk about those storms firing up. Why do some only last 30 minutes, and why do some last longer than that?
That's a very good question. There's two or three different types of storms, and we'll focus on, there's the air mass thunderstorm, and those are the storms that will only last 30 minutes to an hour. And if we look at the graphic that we have behind us, this is actually a supercell storm, and the difference between this storm and those air mass storms is that the storm itself is actually tilted. And an air mass storm that only lasts 30 minutes to an hour, it's completely vertically stacked so that the rain underneath the storm cools the air underneath the storm, and so it has no fuel. It's cool air instead of that warm, unstable air that it needs. So when you have a tilted storm like this, the rain is falling in one part of the storm, but then there's this clear space under the storm, and it can still get that warm inflow that it needs to survive. And that's why you could see supercells last 5, 6, even 7 hours just go all the way across the state, because it just keeps cycling and spinning, and that clear air underneath the storm can really help fuel it.
It's amazing how big it is. We usually just see this aspect here, but there's a lot going on up top. All right, Ben, so now we know how and why severe weather happens here in Oklahoma in the spring. What can we do to prepare ourselves?
Well, there's several things you can do. You always need to have a plan. Know what you and your family are going to do when severe weather strikes. Having a NOAA weather radio in the shelter in your home, or an inner hallway of your home, so that when severe weather does strike and you are taking shelter, you can still stay updated with what's going on. And second is you need to have a good shelter. Either have a safe room if you don't have a basement, or one of those hallways or inner rooms that are away from windows and mirrors and anything else that can be used as sharp debris. And the last thing is if you're out driving, never try to outrun a tornado. And overpasses are not a good place to hide. The best place to be is get out of your car and get to a sturdy structure, and if you don't have time to do that, lie flat in a ditch And that's the best place to be because that's where the lowest wind speeds will be, and you can, for the most part, stay away from the debris.
Ben Walden, good information. Thank you very much.
Thanks.
For more weather information, be sure to go to newsok.com and click on weather.